Grade 9 EMS Trade Unions. The contribution of trade unions to sustainable growth and development. Pages 138 to pages 140. Now, we learned in Unit 2 that trade unions continue to play an important role in addressing socioeconomic issues such as unemployment and poverty in South Africa. Trade unions have a contribution to make to sustainable growth and economic development in South Africa by promoting practices that create jobs and improve the standards of living. In this unit, you will learn more about the role that trade unions can play in promoting employment, reducing poverty, and stimulating economic growth. Two factors contribute to unemployment. First, lack of skills, and second, globalization. Now, trade unions have a contribution to make in reducing the country's high unemployment rate. The two factors that currently contribute to unemployment can be addressed by trade unions. Now, what is a lack of skills? Many individuals in South Africa are unemployed because they lack the necessary skills and knowledge to find work. Trade unions are addressing this problem by doing certain things. The first thing they do to deal with a lack of skills is they provide education and training opportunities. The trade unions ensure that the curriculum at schools and tertiary institutions is in line with the skills required by the businesses and in the industry. They encourage their members of trade unions to develop their skills and advance their knowledge. They also prompt businesses to invest in the skills development of workers. So that is how they deal with lack of skills. Then, how does trade unions help with globalization? We will talk about that just now. But first, you have to understand what does the term globalization mean. Globalization is the process by which high technology communication, low transport costs, and free international trade transform the world into one big global market. Globalization is also characterized by a lot of imports and exports that are sold and bought by different countries from one another. So globalization, because of advances in technology, such as the use of internet, it has revolutionized the way in which business is done. It makes trade and communication between countries much easier. Economic and political changes, such as the removal of trade restrictions between countries, have also led to a change in the business environment. These changes have removed barriers to trade, which increases the quantity of trade between countries. The world is becoming one big competitive global market, we can say, with extremely tough competition in goods and services, as well as in labor markets. This phenomenon is known as globalization. Now, globalization has led to an increase in imports into South Africa. These imported goods are sometimes cheaper than the locally produced goods. For instance, the chicken are bought from overseas much cheaper than the local farmers sell it to. So that then it results in dumping. So a lot of other countries dump their products into our country, and then people get it for much cheaper than they buy from the local farmers. Okay, so this causes a lot of problems. So this results in South Africans then purchasing less of the expensive locally produced goods and more cheaper foreign goods. This increases competition, and it has caused some local producers to decrease their level of production, which has led to the loss of jobs. In order to avoid more job losses in the future, local producers will have to become more competitive by lowering their production costs and increase labor productivity. Now, trade unions helps a lot with fighting for the local producers. So with a specific problem, and like I've mentioned, with dumping of chicken from Brazil and so on to South Africa, a lot of people are buying that chicken, and that causes a lot of the local farmers to lose income. So the trade unions helps with getting the attention of South Africans to start buying the products from our country that are locally produced. So given this trend of globalization and the increase of international competition, what can trade unions do? What role can they play with regards to this increase of international competition and local producers losing a lot of profit because people tend to buy the imported goods rather than the locally produced goods? The first thing trade unions can do is they may choose to resist the trend of globalization by putting pressure on the government to restrict international trade and eliminate foreign competition in South Africa. This will protect the local manufacturers from foreign competition and thereby prevent further job losses. Alternatively, trade unions may also choose to support the trend of globalization. Why? Because sometimes globalization can help the local manufacturers to become more competitive. If trade unions adopt this approach, they will need to become involved in strategies to increase local production, lower local production costs, and increase labor productivity. So they can fight for both sides, either for globalization or against globalization. But obviously it depends on the scenario we are facing. We know you will later in business studies, if you continue with the subject, you will learn a lot about the problem of dumping. When excess products are imported from other countries and then sold more cheaply in our country. And then people tend to buy the imported goods rather than the goods that are produced locally in our country. And then trade unions obviously will fight for this cause, and they will put pressure on government to restrict this international trade where they import these goods that are rather bought than local goods. But then on the other side, as I said, they can fight for the other side of globalization where they obviously motivate it and stand in motivation towards globalization. So these are the two things that that trade unions can help the country with and the people of. Then let us quickly look at lack of skills. Many people are unemployed because they have a lack of skill and lack of knowledge to find work. So then I've already discussed it in short, but here you can find, if you want to study it, how do trade unions address this issue? And as we said already, they provide education and training opportunities. They ensure that the curriculum at schools and tertiary institutions is in line with the required skills by commerce and industry. So, and then also they encourage members of trade unions to develop their skills and advance their knowledge. They also promote business to invest in skills development of their workers. We have already discussed economic and political changes takes place. Like for instance, if there were trade restrictions between countries, that means that you can't import from those countries and they can't export from you to you. Then these have been lifted, and then it leads to a change in the business environment because now there's an increase in competition, there's an increase in production, and it changes the whole atmosphere of the business environment. Now countries can trade with one another because of trade restrictions that has been lifted. So the world is becoming one big competitive global market, and this we call globalization. Globalization has led to an increase in imports and exports. Okay, and you can look at the definition of imports and exports on page 139. Imports are goods and services brought into the country from another country, and exports are obviously goods and services that we take to other countries or we sell to other countries. For instance, wine that are being exported during this time. So during this time of COVID, the local people cannot buy wine, but we still export wines to other countries, and that is how the industry still stays alive. So this is the definition. Imported goods are sometimes cheaper. South Africans buy imported goods rather than locally produced goods. So, for instance, the chicken, the rainbow chicken company that I've told you about in the previous slide has lost a lot of money because some shops would rather import chicken from other countries where it's cheaper to import in bulk. And then the local producers, like for instance, the specific company I'm referring to was Rainbow Chicken, that lost a lot of money because of the fact that the locals rather buy the imported goods, and then they lose profit, and then they have to obviously let some of their workers go because they can't, pay for them, and then the workers gets retrenched, and the company loses profit, and it's a big issue. So a few years ago, the trade unions helped with fighting against this specific problem. So globalization causes a lot of stress with regards to competition, because now you're not only competing locally, but you are competing internationally. So this competition results in some local producers to decrease their level of production because they cannot keep up. And then every time your level of production decreases, then you lose profit. Then you can't afford your employees anymore. Then there's a loss of jobs. And this causes further losses of jobs in future because the company cannot recover. Local producers will have to become more competitive by lowering their production costs and increasing labor productivity. But when they lower their production costs, then the products are not always at the best quality. So that also affects a lot of aspects in the future. Now, what is the role of trade unions in globalization issues? Now, as we already said, trade unions may choose to resist globalization or they may choose to support. So they either resist it or they support it. And we've already discussed it. How do they resist it? By putting pressure on government to restrict international trade and eliminating foreign competition. So this is, for instance, that trade union that supported Rainbow Chicken. They put pressure on government to restrict the import of chicken from other countries and said that we need to support our local producers, our local farmers. Then on the other side, they can also choose to support the trend. If it is obviously going to help the local producers to become more productive, then they will help the local manufacturers to become more competitive. Okay, reducing poverty and improving standards of living. That is another thing that trade unions stand for. Now, as we know, many South Africans live in poverty. And we know that the biggest problem in our country is the gap between rich and poor. We have very low standards of living, and trade unions can contribute to the reduction of this problem in our country. The first thing is they can continue to put pressure on employers to improve the working conditions and raise the level of money, wages and salaries paid to the workers. Now, this wages and salaries, we know, is called remuneration. Secondly, they can ensure that businesses comply to the Act of Basic Conditions and of Employment. Now, this act provides a legal framework that governs minimum wages and working conditions. So within this act, they will stipulate how many hours a day you are supposed to work. And the minute you work more than those hours, you need to receive overtime payment. And it also stipulates that you're not allowed to work on Sundays unless you've agreed with your employer. And it also states that obviously the conditions under which you must work must be healthy and it must be good, etc. So it's the legal framework that governs your wages and your working conditions, the working conditions under which you work. So the trade unions need to ensure that businesses comply to this act. Then a second thing that trade unions do is they help with stimulating economic growth. Now, what is economic growth? Economic growth is defined as an increase in the productive capacity of a country. So the minute you produce more in your country, your gross domestic production is increases, then we say that there has been an economic growth that has taken place. So when there is economic growth, there is an increase in the level of economic activity or production in the country. More goods and services. So it's not just goods that are produced, it's also services that are delivered. There are more goods and services, and therefore more jobs are created, and therefore the standards of living of people improve. Now, the standard of living is your standard in which you live. So if you are very poor and you cannot afford your basic necessities and needs, then you have a very low standard of living. If you are rich, you have a high standard of living. So the answer in getting equality amongst all people in terms of income and standard of living is obviously to increase the production capacity in terms of goods and services of a country. So trade unions can contribute to economic growth by improving the productivity of labor. When labor is more productive, in other words, when people are more happy and they work harder and they produce more, there will be an increase in output, in other words, what they produce, and in goods and services that are created. Trade unions can help to improve the productivity of labor. How can they do that? How can they stimulate economic growth? Now, first, trade unions can stimulate economic growth by improving the workers' skill level. Everything starts with skills. If you do not have the skills for a particular job, you will not be productive. So, school is very important, training, experience, everything is very important. So, if they tell the businesses, or they put pressure on businesses to send their workers for skills development courses, then that will improve the worker's skill level. Automatically, it will improve the productivity within the business. It will improve the gross domestic production of our country, and thereon it will improve the standards of living of each South African in our country. Secondly, there must be an increase in the workers' motivation. If their motivation increases, they will have a better work ethic, and therefore they will work harder and they will produce more again. And also, then, if the workers are motivated, they will not strike. And every time a business strike, the workers of a business strike, the business loses income. And then the productivity decreases. And if the productivity decreases of every single country, business in our country, then the gross domestic production of our country will decrease. And then the standards of living of our citizens will decrease. So it is a vicious circle. Then fourthly, the trade unions ensure that the workers are healthy. So, and the conditions that they work under, and where do we get that? Where is that stipulated? In the Act. What is the Act's name? Basic Conditions of Employment Act. That stipulates the conditions must be healthy. The workers' conditions under which they work needs to be good conditions, healthy conditions, because then again the workers will be more productive, the productivity will increase, the gross domestic production of the country will increase, and the standards of living of the country will increase. Again, that's that circle. Then lastly, the trade unions need to encourage the business to adopt sound management practices. And as you can remember in grade 8, we spoke about what a good manager is like. A good manager supports their workers. A good manager motivates their workers. A good manager communicates well to their workers. So if the trade unions encourage managers to have good management practices, then the workers will be motivated, their work ethics will be good, they will be healthy, and then productivity will increase. Okay, so this is it for this lesson. On page 140 of your Today textbook, topic 8, you will see that activity 8.5 is there, and we want you to please complete that, and as soon as you get back to school, we will mark it together. Thank you for listening.